I will never forget the sting of that night. The chandelier above us threw light across polished marble, and the champagne in everyone's glasses sparkled like tiny stars. But what cut through the glitter was my mother-in-law's voice. Sharp and clear enough to slice the room in half. This penthouse isn't really yours, Eleanor. Daniel's father already secured it through the family trust. You're just lucky we let you live here. She smiled as she said it, raising her glass so the room could applaud. And they did, strangers in gowns and tuxedos clapping politely, as if humiliation were part of the evening's entertainment. I held an envelope in my hand, heavy with notarized papers, the deed, the escrow confirmations, proof of every dollar I wired myself. The notary seal pressed against my palm like a reminder I was not imagining things. This was my home, bought with the sweat of a decade of work in finance. Every bonus check and sleepless night poured into one down payment. But in that moment, under Claudia's pearls and Daniel's silence, it felt as though the floor beneath me belonged to someone else. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been dismissed? In public. By people who believed they could erase you with a smile. If you know that feeling, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because what happened next will sound unbelievable unless you've lived it yourself. I should have seen it coming. Claudia never hid her disdain. From the first day she stepped into my parents' modest living room, she called it quaint in the same tone you'd use for a chipped teacup. Charles, my father-in-law, once asked my dad about his retirement plan, then laughed when he heard pension. To them, life was measured in portfolios and square footage. People like my parents were invisible. Daniel always told me not to take it personally. They're particular, he said. But they want the best for us. I swallowed that excuse for years, hoping time would soften their edges. Instead, they sharpened. When we found the duplex penthouse, I thought I had won. It was not just a home. It was proof of everything my parents had sacrificed for me. I covered nearly 80% of the down payment from my own savings. I chose the layout with care, the upper level for us, and the lower level, a private suite where my parents could stay as they aged. Dad's heart medication would sit in the fridge. Mom's chair with soft cushions would face the wide windows. It was my way of finally giving back. Claudia saw something else. She saw a trophy she could display, a space she could mold into her vision. From the first tour, she dismissed the guest suite. A waste, she said. We'll make it a wine gallery. Daniel stood silent. He always did. The housewarming was supposed to be mine, a warm gathering of friends, colleagues, and family. I arranged every detail. I made sure the food fit Dad's diet. I placed soft throws on the chairs for Mom. It was to be their night, as much as mine. Instead, when the doors opened, a parade of strangers filed in. Investors, socialites, Veronica's friends dressed as though for an opera. Caterers unloaded trays I had never ordered. A valet station appeared outside as though this were a hotel. My name wasn't on any list. The invitations might as well have been rewritten overnight. When I slipped into the hall, I found Claudia beside a table of photographs. She had rearranged them, moving my parents' picture behind a vase. While hers sat front and center, she caught my stare and said, "We don't want ordinary people ruining the family photo wall." My throat went tight. I wanted to scream, but instead I held the envelope closer. Inside was proof of ownership. The ink still fresh. But proof means little when everyone around you claps for the lie. I remember stepping onto the terrace, cold air rushing against my face. The city stretched wide and glittering below. But I felt smaller than ever. My parents were on their way, dressed in their best, expecting a night of pride and celebration. What they would walk into was something else entirely, a stage built to erase them. And that was when a young associate, one of Daniel's colleagues, brushed past me. He whispered without looking at me, "Check your husband's group chat." Then he disappeared into the crowd. Later, I would see the messages Claudia instructing Daniel to get my signature on trust transfer paperwork. Another line, "Locks will be upgraded this week. Safety first." They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I would smile, stay polite, and fade into the background, like my parents' photo behind the vase. But what they didn't know was this: I had my own copy of every document. And I had no intention of letting them rewrite me out of my own life. When Daniel and I first met, I believed he was different from the family that raised him. He was clever, charming, the kind of man who could make a room laugh without trying too hard. I mistook that charm for warmth. I mistook his ambition for drive. My parents, cautious as ever, welcomed him with careful smiles. Dad shook his hand firmly. Mom poured coffee despite the stiffness in her fingers from arthritis. They wanted to believe in him because I did. But Claudia and Charles made their opinions known from the beginning. At our engagement party, Claudia drifted through my parents' modest living room in a gown that seemed to outshine the lamps. "How quaint," she said, fingering the curtain fabric. Charles leaned in close to Dad, asking about his investment portfolio. Then chuckled when Dad said pension. That laugh stuck with me. It wasn't joy. It was dismissal. Daniel brushed it off. "They're just set in their ways. They want the best for us." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. The first years of marriage were easier. Daniel made Sunday breakfasts. We painted our small condo ourselves. And my parents came by with casseroles and encouragement. When I landed my first big promotion, Dad cried. And Mom framed my business card. Daniel clapped me on the back. Proud. Or so I thought. The shift came slowly. He started taking every call from Claudia. No matter where we were. At dinner. At the movies. In bed, her voice always cut in. "She just needs my input," he'd explain, tucking his phone away. By the time we bought the penthouse, Claudia and Charles were already in the blueprint. They arrived at the first walkthrough with a decorator in tow, taking notes on every wall. "The master feels cramped," Claudia declared. "This suite is wasted on aging parents. We'll make it a library." Charles nodded, talking about contractors he trusted. Daniel stayed quiet, hands in his pockets. I told myself the housewarming would be different. I planned every detail. A guest list of friends, colleagues, and both families. Menus carefully chosen for Dad's heart condition. Comfortable seating arranged for Mom. It wasn't just a party, it was a promise to my parents that this house belonged to them too. 3 days before, Daniel mentioned casually, "Mother invited a few people. Just some family friends." I asked how many. He shrugged. 4. Maybe 5. I swallowed my unease. What harm could a handful of extras do? On the morning of the party, I woke early. Nervous, but excited. I polished the silver my mother once saved for holidays. I placed fresh flowers by the window. Daniel seemed distracted. Sharper in dress than usual. Glued to his phone. At noon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found not 4 or 5 people, but a parade. Claudia in silver satin. Charles booming his laugh. 6 couples behind them, dressed as though for a gala. Caterers carried trays past me. A valet stand appeared in the driveway, as if conjured. "Surprise Claudia, Zhang. We thought we'd make a day of it." I stood frozen, watching strangers file into my home. Daniel appeared at my side, adjusting his tie. "It's just a small change of plans. These are important people. It'll help us both." Help us. The words echoed in my head. Because as Claudia swept away my handmade centerpiece and replaced it with orchids that looked rented, I realized none of this was for me. It wasn't even for us. It was for them. Their power. Their image. That afternoon, I slipped into the hall to call my parents. But Daniel caught me. "Maybe they should come another time," he murmured, eyes sliding away. "The party is more formal than expected." "My parents are coming," I said. The steadiness of my voice surprised even me. His silence in return said everything. And what they didn't know was that in my desk drawer sat a folder bank statements. Catering receipt. I never authorized. Invoices Charles had slipped onto our joint account. I had been keeping records. Even before I knew why. I would need them soon. Tell me, have you ever watched a celebration twist into something unrecognizable? If you've lived through that kind of betrayal, share it below. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened when my parents arrived turned quiet humiliation into open war. The party grew louder, as the afternoon slid into evening. I had imagined warmth, laughter, the smell of food my parents could enjoy. Instead, I found myself standing in the corner of my own living room, a stranger among strangers. The chandelier sparkled. Music flowed. But none of it belonged to me. A woman draped in diamonds wandered into the guest suite, the room I had carefully designed for my parents. She glanced around and declared, "This will make a splendid wine cellar." Claudia's laugh chimed in. "Exactly. We don't need that space wasted on old people." Her words, sharp and casual, struck deeper than any scream. I opened my mouth. But Daniel stared at the floor, swirling his drink, unwilling to meet my eyes. His silence burned hotter than Claudia's cruelty. I reminded myself that soon my parents would arrive. Their presence would anchor me, remind me of who I was before Claudia's polished world tried to erase me. But then the first blow fell. I stepped outside briefly to fetch something from the car. When I returned, my key no longer fit. I twisted, jiggled, tried again. The lock remained stiff. I pressed the bell. Through the glass, I saw figures moving, servers carrying trays. But no one opened. Finally, a young man in a white jacket cracked the door, balancing a platter. He looked startled. "Back entrance," he muttered. "This is for guests only." I stared at him. "I am the owner." He blinked, unsure. But Claudia appeared just then. "We upgraded the locks," she said smoothly, smiling for those within earshot. Daniel agreed, "It's safer this way." Safer. I wasn't safe in my own home. The evening unraveled from there. Voices in the crowd referred to the penthouse as the Cunningham place, as though I were invisible. One man raised a glass and said, "Daniel has married well enough, but she'll need polish." The guests laughed. While I stood holding an envelope filled with deeds and bank transfers, no one wanted to see. Then came a whisper from one of Daniel's colleagues, pressed quickly into my ear as he passed, "Check the group chat." Later, I would read the messages Claudia instructing Daniel to secure my signature on transfer paperwork. Charles boasting that the locks were already changed. One line that froze my blood: "She won't fight. She never does." I clenched the envelope tighter. They thought they knew me. They thought silence meant surrender. By the time I slipped back onto the terrace, cold air biting my cheeks, I saw my parents arrive. Through the glass doors of the lobby below, I caught sight of them, Dad in his blue sweater, Mom in her best dress, both smiling, unaware of the storm waiting. They walked to the desk. But the doorman shook his head, pointing to a list. Their names weren't there. They weren't guests. They weren't even permitted upstairs. Claudia had planned it that way. My stomach knotted. My parents, who had worked double shifts, saved every dollar, believed in me more than anyone, were being treated like intruders at my own party. And still, Daniel said nothing. What they didn't know was that the night wasn't finished. And neither was I. From the terrace, I watched my parents in the lobby below. Dad leaned heavily against the bench, pressing his hand to his chest, the way he always did when the strain became too much. Mom rubbed his back in small circles, her face pale but determined. They were dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate me. Yet they sat locked out like beggars at the door. I raced to the elevator, swiping my card. The light blinked red. Invalid. My access had already been changed. My throat tightened as panic crept in. I took the service stairwell 2 steps at a time, heart hammering louder than the music above. When I burst into the lobby, Claudia was already there. She looked serene, pearls gleaming under the chandelier. "Call them a car," she told the concierge. "They'll be more comfortable at home." "These are my parents," I said, breathless. "They belong here." Her smile never wavered. "Eleanor, don't embarrass yourself. This evening is important. We cannot have ordinary people spoiling it." Ordinary people. My parents, who had carried me through every sacrifice, who had paid for my textbooks with overtime wages, were nothing more than an inconvenience in her eyes. The concierge looked at me helplessly, trapped between instructions. A young server whispered. Freight elevator, use that. I led my parents down the side hallway, through the smell of detergent and stainless steel, until the groaning doors carried us up. When we entered through the kitchen, I found Claudia and Charles at the marble counter. Spread before them were papers, and Daniel stood beside them. Ben, in Hans? What is this? I demanded. Charles tapped the page. A simple transfer of authority. Streamlines, decisions for the property. A draft power of attorney. My stomach lurched. They wanted Daniel to hold signing power over everything, including the deed I had paid for. Claudia looked up at me, her voice sweet as honey. It's for the best. Dear. You're not accustomed to these matters. Let us handle it. Behind me, my parents shuffled in quietly, unsure where to stand. They didn't want to make trouble. Even now, my father's face had gone gray, his breath shallow. Mom tried to smile, but her lips trembled. The orchestra in the main hall struck up a bright waltz, the sound floating through the air like cruel contrast. Guests clinked glasses, laughter rising, oblivious to the collapse happening in the back kitchen. I stepped forward, gripping the envelope I still carried. Inside were my copies, the deed with my name, the escrow wires, every bank transfer, proof that I was not invisible, proof that I would not be erased. You will not sign this, I said to Daniel. My voice was low, steady, but it shook the air. He looked torn, eyes darting between his parents and me. His silence lasted too long. And that was when Dad staggered, clutching his chest, nearly falling against the counter. Everything froze. Guests craned their necks from the doorway, murmurs rising. Claudia hissed. Not here. Eleanor. Take them out. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. My father was on the verge of collapse, my mother trembling at his side. And she was worried about appearances. I dialed emergency services with a steady hand. My father has a heart condition. He needs help now. The music faltered. Glasses stilled. For the first time all evening, people looked at me, really looked at me, as if realizing I was more than a placeholder in Claudia's performance. The ambulance siren echoed faintly from the street below. And I knew, standing there, with my parents fragile before me, that this war was no longer about pride. It was about survival. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Red lights flickering against the penthouse windows. Guests shrank back, clutching their glasses as though calamity might be contagious. My father was lifted onto a stretcher. Oxygen mask secured. Monitors beeping softly. My mother clung to his hand, her knuckles white. I followed them into the hallway. But before the doors closed, Claudia caught my arm. Her whisper was sharp enough to cut. You've embarrassed this family. All of this, your dramatics. Do you realize who was in that room? You've ruined Daniel's future. I yanked my arm free. My father's life matters more than your guest list. The doors shut between us. At the hospital, I sat by my father's bed as the doctor explained his condition. He was exposed too long to the cold before the episode. The doctor said gently, his heart can't withstand that kind of strain. Another hour, and the consequences could have been irreversible. Shame and fury burned inside me. He was supposed to have been safe in my home. Instead, he was left in the lobby, like an unwanted visitor. That night, as Mom dozed in a chair beside Dad, I opened my laptop. In my inbox waited confirmation emails for catering services I had never ordered. A receipt for $22,000 charged to our joint account. The signature, not mine. Attached were renovation quotes to repurpose the guest suite into a wine gallery. All roads led back to Claudia and Charles. I wasn't powerless. I had the receipts, the deeds, the bank transfers. Evidence stronger than pearls and champagne. 2 mornings later, I returned to the penthouse with a locksmith and a police escort. Primary owner. I told the officer, showing him the deed. The locksmith's drill whirred. The locks clattered to the floor, and new brass gleamed in their place. For the first time in days, the key in my hand worked again. Inside, I found proof of everything I feared: Claudia's gowns hanging in the guest suite closet, Charles's toiletries in the bathroom. And on Daniel's desk a folder of renovation plans. A half-completed change of address form with their names listed as residents. They had not been improvising. They had been plotting. I photographed every page. That afternoon, we met at my attorney's office. Rachel sat beside me. Calm and deliberate. Claudia entered first. Charles just behind her. And Daniel trailing. Hollow-eyed. Charles boomed. This is unnecessary. Family issues should be handled privately. Rachel's voice was even. When locks are changed without the owner's consent. When funds are withdrawn without discussion. And when elderly parents are left outside in dangerous conditions. We move beyond family issues into legal ones. Claudia tried to wave it off. Daniel was preparing improvements. Necessary upgrades. Rachel slid a medical report across the table. The words were printed in stark black: cardiac distress precipitated by exposure. This, Rachel said, constitutes elder endangerment. For the first time, Claudia's expression faltered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. What do you want? Eleanor, just tell us. I had rehearsed it. Calm. Precise. Like a contract clause. First, the return of all withdrawn funds. Second, a written agreement. No modifications without my consent. Third, your parents will never have unsupervised access to my home. Fourth, payment of all medical expenses from that night. Claudia hissed. Extortion. No. I said. Accountability. Daniel looked at me. Then at his parents. His voice was quiet. But firm. We'll return the money. We'll pay the bills. Claudia's face went pale. Daniel. He turned away from her. He could have died. Mother. And you care about your image. The settlement was signed within days. Funds restored. Agreements notarized. Medical bills paid in full. But the final blow came from elsewhere. The building's security footage leaked online, my parents sitting in the lobby. Shivering. While Claudia brushed past in her silver gown. Within hours, the video spread. By evening, hashtags with her name trended nationwide. The invitations she prized so dearly vanished overnight. Board positions quietly dissolved. For the first time in her life, her pearls could not shield her from consequence. I didn't release the video. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of breathing through locked doors. And as I tucked my parents into the guest suite, finally safe, I realized the war had shifted. For the first time, Claudia and Charles were the ones on defense. 6 months passed before the penthouse truly felt like mine again. The locks gleamed each morning when I turned the key. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was small. Yet it carried the weight of victory. Inside, the guest suite stood just as I intended. With Dad's medication box on the nightstand, and Mom's favorite blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. They visited often now. Without hesitation. Without fear of being turned away. Claudia and Charles kept their distance. After the lobby video spread, their empire of appearances collapsed quietly but decisively. Invitation dried up. Charity boards rotated them off. The gala circuit moved on without them. For people who lived on reputation, the silence was louder than any gavel. Daniel tried to make amends. Therapy. Long talks. Even apologies that sounded almost sincere. I thought avoiding conflict meant keeping peace. He admitted once. I didn't realize it meant betraying you. His words were softer than they used to be. But trust isn't restored with speeches. It has to be built brick by brick. And I kept my guard high. With Rachel's help, we drafted a postnuptial agreement that set every boundary in black and white: no modifications without my signature. Separate accounts. Restricted access for his parents. For once, the law itself stood between me and Claudia. She couldn't redecorate her way around a notarized clause. Life shifted slowly. I returned to work sharper than before. Less tolerant of manipulation. More attuned to the quiet ways power is abused. Younger colleagues began asking me for advice. I told them the same thing. Again and again, keep your own copies. Never assume silence will protect you. At home, Sunday dinners resumed. Dad told stories I had never heard. Mom hummed while folding napkins. And the table filled with laughter again. Those evenings stitched something back together in me. Layer by layer. The last time I saw Claudia, she stood in my doorway. Pearls smaller than before. Her voice was brittle when she said, "Your home is lovely, dear." I simply nodded. Some relationships cannot be rebuilt. Some should not be. What I learned from all of this could fit on a single scrap of paper. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect. The people who deserve a place in your life are the ones who honor your boundaries, not the ones who trample them. For years, I thought revenge had to be fire and fury. Now I know it can be quieter. It can be signatures and clauses. Locks replaced. And truth revealed at the right time. It can be reclaiming a room by living in it with those who love you. If you believe I made the right choice, comment, right. If you have another way, share it. I want to hear your stories. Because sometimes survival itself is justice. And survival with dignity is the sweetest kind. Story 2. On the day my grandmother's will was read, my parents entered the paneled conference room like winners who had already shook hands with the finish line. My name is Noah. And I am 28 years old. It was their choice, not mine. That I hadn't seen them in years. Therefore, the shock wasn't the first thing that struck me. On their jackets, there was the scent of her lodge. A chessboard with one missing pawn and the combination of wood smoke and pine sap that formerly meant hot chocolate. They nodded to one another as they stood behind the leather seats at the large wood table. All professional smiles. As though the attorney had prepared a plate of prosperity just for them. Before a job interview, my father rehearsed his calm, cautious grin in the mirror. It seemed like checking a box when my mother shot me a brief, flat look. There. Recognized. Dismissed. Elena Silver, my older sister, sat between them. As Chris' ponytail goes over a line notebook, it appears as though she is getting ready for a quarterly evaluation. They sat far away from me. I didn't hear from them. What this day meant to them was already established. I never imagined that I would be the type of person who, in his darkest hours, can recall the precise way a window casts light over a floor. However, I do recall that a portion of the mountains was framed like a painting in the conference room window. Tiny motes floated in the beam and shattered on the side of the lawyer's briefcase as September air swept in from the crest of the lodge. The lodge, which had 3 levels of cedar with hand-carved railings and creaky staircases that sang at night, was located approximately an hour outside of town. And if the realtor sheet stated $1, Jubei. Ling ling ling. I'd always thought it had a heartbeat. That figure was only the surface. There were thick blankets and birthday cakes inside. My grandmother's ability to read a room before anybody else ever recognized there was one. As well as her humming of an old rural song. I was now expected to sit and listen while those who hadn't spoken to her in years made decisions about how to break it up. I assure you that none of this was overblown. It moved slowly. It was the early arrival of that special winter silence. When was the last time I saw my parents? At the age of 19. I was still moving boxes out of a dorm room that was no longer mine because I had made poor decisions about my major, career, and sense of loyalty. With the clipped compassion adults save for kids who've shattered a table full of crystal glassware, they warned me that I was making things more difficult for everyone. That I should be practical and move out. They used synonyms instead of saying I was disowned. Independent grown-up repercussions. In order to go to my grandmother's on the weekends, I spent 2 weeks sleeping in my car and memorized the mountain routes. I justified my stay by saying that I was working on the firewood stack. She told me about obstinate trees that endured windstorms and bowed. And she prepared eggs with excessive amounts of butter. My parents were never discussed with me. Not at all. She had a way of giving you the impression that your choices weren't fatal. Only a few paragraphs in a novel with many more pages to go. I created a life that was independent of their approval. A little trail outfitter hired me. The sort of environment that has a soapy, canvas-like fragrance. Every boot was taught to me. Every seam in every pack was sold. I guided them on overnight excursions, day treks, and sock hunts. It was hardly the life my family boasted about at Christmas gatherings. Nor was it glamorous. However, I ultimately owned myself. As my grandmother's hands became unstable, I continued to travel to the lodge twice a month. Sanded a loose stair tread. Kept the gutters free of needles. And, when the snow arrived, fastened the vintage snowshoes on the porch rail like ornaments waiting for feet. I started bringing her soup and reading to her from the local paper instead of seeming like I was just there to do chores. She would inquire after listening with her eyes closed. She had no way in such calm way. Are you aware of your value? I always assumed she was referring to my hourly wage. She had another meaning. The attorney, although his name is Daniel Hayes, he appears to be a tie-wearing Mr. Hayes from birth, asked us to have a seat. I tugged my chair in the leather, which adhered to my shirt through a spot of perspiration between my shoulder blades. And my parents finally gave me the slightest wince. If I wasn't so exhausted. It would have been amusing that Elena sat right next to the lawyer. Apply nail polish and arrange everything in tidy, manageable lines. Since we were 10 and 12. She had been their star. Scholarships. Promotions. The unwritten agreement that she would never make. And decisions that made them look awful at dinner were all given to her. After a little league game, my father told me, "We will always support you so long as you honor our family." That was perhaps the first time I ever realized I was a concept. Not a son. I had already failed twice. Perhaps honor starts with baseballs. Property may be the end. Our purpose is to carry out Mrs. Dorian Novak's final will and testament. Mr. Hayes started. He described the sealed envelope, the copies, the witness signatures, and the formalities. My mother put her hand on my father's and smiled at him. Her teeth whitened. He avoided looking at me. In the silence following the lawyer's words, I could hear my own swallow. Because it's your own body informing you that you exist. That tiny click appears louder. Elena leaned near my mother and murmured, I have to say, the only sensible course of action is to make it a destination brand. That was a waste of equity. She didn't make an effort to speak more quietly. I saw her eyes analyze a plan as though she were already a co-owner. Remove a wall from a deck. Swap out the blankets for industrial throws that can withstand spills. And take a Yelp photo. Every moment they entered. My parents had been grinning. However, the term brand made my father's jawline look victorious. That was the way he had always wanted to speak. His vocabulary from his dreams. Resources. Optimization. Give. Mr. Hayes enumerated the little details. 3 nieces received their first jewelry. She gave an old friend her silver hairbrush. A neighbor who constantly shoveled the porch steps after storms deserves 2 blankets. My throat constricted. She gave the quilts names, such as Carpenter's Wheel and Star Mountain, to describe their journey. The light in the room changed when a cloud passed outside. The mountains in the window appeared closer for a brief time, darkened into a lone shoulder, sprinting in our direction. Now? Mr. Hayes stated, carefully moving the paper to the actual property at 7 Ridge Road, which you may know as the Novak Mountain Lodge. I was unable to resist. As if to meet a finishing tape, I pulled my mother's chair forward just a hair's breadth and straightened her. My grandma used to say that whomever loves my lodge enough to protect it owns it. I had never heard her explain what that meant. She had never mentioned you. All she had inquired was if I was aware of my value. Mr. Hayes's reading was level and clear. I thus leave and bequeath to my grandson, Noah James Novak, in fee the Novak Mountain Lodge, along with all of its fixtures, land, and appurtenances, valued at $1. 2 Bay. Ling ling ling. Easy. Along with the 4 rental cabins indicated on the survey that is included. This bequest replaces all previous instruments and is made with full knowledge and purpose. My mother's fingers remained on my father's hand, but his smile froze from the outside in. Elena's pen squeaked abruptly when it halted mid-scroll. I held my breath for a moment. Even if you let your imagination run wild, it seems like you've stepped off a curb in the real moment. For half a beat, you misjudged nothing beneath your feet. And then you were startled, with a quick breath that probably sounded like a giggle. I pushed air from my chest. I wasn't giggling. Last week, I recalled how my grandmother had instructed me to make sure the cedar blocks had not dried up and asked me to fetch the green tin from her bedroom closet. Some people believe that love is demonstrated by who shows up when the table is set. So she murmured, "Noah," glancing past me, and then toward a window where it was pouring. "When the stove runs out, sometimes the person who arrives with firewood proves love." "Are you telling me to become a lumberjack?" I had joked. Her eyes were shiny but steady. And she had squeezed my hand. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes. But there are restrictions." The phrase fell into a quiet lake like a stone. A number of provisions pertaining to management, sale, and contest have been incorporated by Mrs. Novak. My parents' brittle grin came back. My father answered, "But showing, of course, because the family was also ready. It goes straight to the source." Elena interrupted, giving me a nod without turning to face me. "But he will require direction. It lacks experience." She made a professional grimace of pity at Mr. Hayes. "We are available to assist. We can make this a legitimate enterprise." Mr. Hayes asked kindly if I may finish. "Miss Novak." He didn't hold off till she responded. "The first clause prohibits sales. For 7 years. The lodge is not for sale. In the case of a sale or contest during that time. The second designates a land trust as a remaining beneficiary. Unusual but legal. The third provision designates a management replacement in the event of incapacity. The fourth clause provides a great deal of detail." He gave me a glance. He glanced at my parents. Then, as though preparing himself, he glanced down at the page. "It has to do with residence and access." I sensed my heart pounding. Another cloud passed across the sun, and the light from the window decreased once more. Even the wood grain on the table seemed to rise intensely. Mr. Hayes read, "Which may seem strange. I specifically prohibit my son Martin Novak, my daughter-in-law Claire Novak, and any organization under their control from occupying, running, managing, renting, or otherwise profiting from the lodge or related cabins for the duration of the no-sale clause due to their prior behavior and my personal knowledge of their intentions regarding my property. They are only allowed to attend as guests with my grandson's written authorization. Any infraction will result in instant injunctive relief and liquidated penalties as specified in Attachment C." The ensuing silence wasn't quiet. It was packed. The furnace clicked. A printer warmed somewhere down the hall. And the mountain breeze blew in. As though burnt. My mother's hand pulled away from my father's. For the first time, Elena turned to look at me. "That is not possible for her." "But to no one," my father said. He spoke it out. "She is unable to." "She did." Mr. Hayes gave a kind response. "We went over this in great detail with her. She was rather explicit. It can be enforced." Smoothing the edge of a folder. My mother sat up taller. "Clearly, there is a misunderstanding here. Daria cherished her family. This was what she wanted for the family. It wasn't a cake or a holiday that sprang to mind at the time. Last winter, my grandmother told me, standing in the porch light, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a forest is to keep away those who think of trees as nothing more than planks." I didn't realize this had to be said bluntly. Elena straightened up and leaned forward. "Okay," she answered sharply. "We can still build sweat equity, even if the lodge isn't sold for 7 years. We are able to lease its services. We can use the brand to our advantage. Indirect gain is prohibited by the clause," said Mr. Hayes. "No third-party leases to organizations under your control. No management fees." That model was what she expected. Elena's voice became softer in the manner that individuals do when they believe that charm will win the day. "Respected Mr. Hayes. This cannot be done by Noah alone. He's never managed a property. He hasn't even done that. I am able to talk for myself." I spoke in a tone that astonished me since it sounded steady. "I have. For the past year. I've been juggling things with her." It wasn't entirely accurate. I had gone beyond that. For the cabins. Creaita Calendar. Updated the web page created in 2009 by a neighbor who was polite. After snowstorms, images were reshot. And the roofers who repaired the leak above room 7 were coordinated. But listing it seemed like too much boasting. The pain in my gut was a mixture of comfort and anxiety. My dad's lips quirked. You ought to have informed us. He remarked. You ought to have included us. When choices are made unilaterally, this is precisely what occurs. No? You make them feel ashamed. I was lugging a cardboard box past his living room when the word struck the room with such familiarity that I felt like I was 19 again. A lesson on accountability. A fifth clause is present. Mr. Hayes went on, as though he needed to maintain his pace before anyone could catch their breath. It's what we would refer to as a toothy no contest clause. If someone contests this, the 4 cabins will be immediately transferred to the Novak Land Trust, and the lodge will follow after the initial adverse filing. This implies that the cabins would have already moved to the trust and would stay there even if the challenge were unsuccessful. Mrs. Novak wished to leave a lasting impression. The term indelible does not exist. My mother whispered. But it was a distant sound. Mr. Hayes tapped a little bundle of paper clips and folded one sheet back. Additionally, an affidavit and a recorded statement are attached D. She requested that I only play it when absolutely required. He looked at my parents. Then at me. I want to remind everyone here that while you are free to seek advice, speaking now will be recorded on the reading's record. I could feel the weight of thankfulness and sorrow pressing against my ribcage. Not just my grandma had seen them. It was a move she had expected. Before my father said the words, fiduciary duty, they were already practicing the precise angle of his jaw. Elena's pen turned as she attempted to omit the word forbid. I wasn't used to anyone or anything constructing guardrails for myself. They had taken them off and advised me to develop my balance. I pushed my hands to relax after realizing they were clenched in my lap. My father's voice was soft enough for the lawyer, but it was sharp enough for me to know that the woman he was sitting with was not in her right mind. She depended on Noah near the end. She was influenced by him. This document is dubious. He tilted his head conciliatingly toward Mr. Hayes. It will be sensible. Of course. All we have to do is make sure the asset has the greatest possible outcome. Before I could stop myself, I added, it's a lodge. She calls it home. I got a warning from Elena. Look. Noah. Keep this from becoming sentimental. Be realistic. Are you aware of the effects postponed maintenance has on a property such as this? Are you aware of the state of the market? You can't act just on feelings. She desired to keep it intact. My voice trembled a bit as I spoke. She wanted the cottages mended, not flipped. The creek kept clean, and the woodland roots kept up. She wished she could hear non-contractor boots on the porch. A delicate sigh that contained too many winters was released by my mother. Enough. Noah. You were raised by us. Remember. The words rang like a dull bell. I once heard my grandmother say that individuals who are in pain create smaller spaces for others so they can feel larger. When I was 8 years old, I recalled my mother packing lunches by looking at her hands. How she consistently sliced the apple into 8 uniform pieces. I remembered my father showing me how to knot a tie for a school dance as I turned to face him. How he had chuckled when the knot had turned out crooked. Really laughed, as though he were a different man in a different tale. I had not forgotten. I wanted to convey. Remembering did not equate to compliance. I wanted to clarify. Mr. Hayes touched the packet of paper clips. He seemed as though he was going to place a cup on an unreliable surface. Mrs. Novak requested that I provide an extra document exclusively in the event that some people contested her desires. He would be using a pen to tap the names. What is it now? Elena inquired. Too quickly, he said. A sworn statement in a video file. In a declaration. She talks about the interactions she had with each of you in the months before she passed away. And about a meeting at Ridge Cafe, when someone brought up the topic of a sale without her permission. She makes reference. Notes. She makes reference to a developer's offer letter. She makes reference. For the first time since he began reading. He put down anything else. I witnessed a private response seep through his work image. My father sat back as if he had just discovered the chair had arms. Troubled. Then determined. He said. We have nothing to hide. And it sounded just like a statement intended for a jury. Play anything you want. My mom's expression wavered. Martin. Play it again. He said. He faced me. You won't like the curtain call. Noah. If this is a show. A fur boa was gently scraped against the glass by the wind outside. Mr. Hayes hesitated as he took a tiny disc out of an envelope that was placed next to his laptop. He gave me a glance. He responded. Not at them. Noah. She asked you to determine if this is required. She thought you would be aware. Even sound bent forward as the room fell silent in a strange way. A sort of reverse stillness. When I initially told my grandma that I had been hired at the outfitter, I showed her my kitchen. Is this good work? She asked me after wiping her hands on a towel. I said, yes. What we choose to build with our days builds us too. She informed me. I extended my hand to touch the drive. Then stopped short. I couldn't read the looks on my parents' faces as they watched me from behind, waiting to convert the air into strategy. Elena Spinlinga. I made an effort to count my breaths. 1. 2. As though someone had knotted a knot. The little, well-known discomfort behind my breastbone subsided. Play it. Silently. I said. After inserting the disc onto his laptop. Mr. Hayes nodded. A straightforward folder Novak declaration illuminated the screen. Video. He pulled it open. When they attempted to seize it. A single file with a timestamp from 3 months ago. A title. And my grandmother's shaky typing emerged. The room took a collective breath. My folks. Elena. Even me. Mr. Hayes made a click. The screen became brighter. Then my grandma appeared. Seated in the lodge's parlor with the stone chimney behind her. Wearing her blue sweater with the ragged cuffs. With the same composure she used to everything she had ever suffered. She gazed directly into the camera. She cleared her throat once and began talking. Mentioning 3 names. A date. The precise amount of the advance she had been forced to take. And the place where a paper had been slipped across a cafe table in the first phrase. My father grabbed for a glass of water that morning for the first time and missed it since she hadn't requested to sit at it. Hold on. My mother spoke abruptly, in a little but piercing voice. Put the video on hold. She gave me the kind of look she would have if she were staring across a chasm and seeing a stranger. Don't do this. Noah. I stared at her. The light from the television swept across us all. Behind my grandma. In the parlor. The fire crackled. Mr. Hayes's finger briefly lingered on the space bar. And at the moment, when a lifetime of silent choices collected at the threshold of a single, louder one. That's precisely where everything tipped. As my relatives leaned forward, eyes wide, my grandmother's calm, unwavering voice proceeded to explain what had happened. The wind rising in the firs and the mountains pressing closer through the window. They came to the realization that there was far more than they had anticipated. Mr. Hayes didn't hesitate at all. Warm yet piercing the air like a chisel. My grandmother's voice found a fracture line in stone as it filled the conference room. I could see the steam curling behind her in the video. And she said that Martin and Claire took me to Ridge Cafe on the 12th of March under the guise of bringing me for soup. The ancient stone fireplace. Last winter, I used wood glue to repair the chair. They placed a document in front of me and said that it was only a permission to begin roof work. I read the opening paragraph. It has nothing to do with the roof. It has to do with a sale. She stated the offer number while staring straight into the lens. The date and the provision allowing her son to negotiate on her behalf are named by the developers. My father's growing weakness caused him to breathe so deeply that even he was shocked by the sound. Elena's pen, which had been poised, tapped the table twice and dropped an inch. Me grandma went on. Calmly and methodically. I didn't sign it. I requested some time to reflect. My kid became agitated and accused me of being overly emotional. The pen was handed to me by my daughter-in-law. With obstinate pride. She raised her own hands to the camera, displaying their tremble. They claimed to be defending me against myself. I left without signing and went home. I gave Mr. Hayes a call that evening. He should come in the morning. I said. I told him everything. Mr. Hayes gave me a quick inspection before affirming that a bridge he assisted in laying was stable. Too quiet for anybody outside the table to hear. My mother muttered. The video continued even though she didn't recall. According to my grandma, the developer's letter's title is dated. Her expression changed from stern to nearly dejected. "This is hardly a punishment," she added, while others handed me ideas. "I am defending a location I adore, and a boy who wiped snow off my feet and brought me soup." As she steadily signed the affidavit, the video faded away. In the corner, the notary stamps. "Noah, if you are hearing this, it's because I packed an umbrella and anticipated rain," she said as it came to a close. The file ceased. The light in the room appeared less bright, as though the laptop's glow had been the sole source of warmth. Nobody wanted to take on the burden of being the first to speak. Elena cleared her throat at last. She picked her words like stepping stones over a brook, and stated, "That was moving. Emotions, however, are not agreements. It indicates that Noah had access. If anything," she gave Mr. Hayes a glance, "you are aware of the prohibitions against improper influence." Mr. Hayes's hands were folded. "Yes, I do. I am also aware of capability. We conducted 2 assessments. They both thought she was okay. We have statements from nurses. We have the medicine dates. We've got witnesses. Naturally, we will offer all of this if you decide to go that route." The tab peaked like a trench flag as he moved a small folder a few inches forward. Attempting once more. My father reached for the thread he usually used when the rules weren't in his favor. "Noah," he began, his tone softening into the kind of rebuke meant to make you feel unappreciative of your life. "I can't be heard by you. This is not what you're ready for. It has nothing to do with childhood. It has to do with scale. It's not cottage money. Ling ling ling. Ling ling jiu. A lodge is a business that handles litigation, insurance, and wages. You lose a livelihood if you fail. Not just a structure. And our concerns will have been justified." He extended his hands. "Let us assist you." My thoughts were dividing into 2 halves. One part of me, the oldest part, the one trained to nod to avoid making a scene, wanted to say I'd think about it too, by piece. The other part remembered plowing the driveway at 5 in the morning alongside my grandmother, while our breath made little clouds in the headlamp beams. Remembered her telling me to place my weight over the shovel's handle instead of fighting the drift to let gravity be my helper. She had turned hard work into technique. She had turned worry into practice. I tasted copper at the back of my mouth and realized my jaw had been clenched for minutes. "She already chose," I said, careful to keep my voice even. "This wasn't my idea. It was hers." My mother's expression, brittle for so long, finally cracked in a way that made her look briefly like the woman who used to knit on the couch and ask me what book I was reading underneath the performance. "On ek flickered." She pitted us against each other. My mother said she always did. She had a way of crowning favorites and then calling it fate. You don't see it because you benefited. That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent years telling myself I was not the sort of person who needed anyone's crown. Hearing that accusation, I felt tizenketu again, clutching a chess trophy the size of a houseplant. While Elena brought home a list of achievements that rustled when you walked past the fridge, I swallowed. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "I showed up. There's a difference." "Enough," Elena said, shaking off whatever had grabbed her for a moment. "Strateg? There are angles. If we can't sell, we can create a separate company for services cleaning, catering, marketing, and billet. The class says controlled by us. But we can route through colleagues. We're not breaking rules. We're partnering." She offered the room. That corporate smile again. Like a business card, with all the sharp edges sanded off. Mr. Hayes took a breath that sounded like patience being rewrapped for later. "Your mother anticipated that angle as well. The class defines beneficial interest broadly. Any arrangement that results in a net benefit to you or an entity remunerate you falls under the prohibition. And if you attempt to evade it, the trust activates. I strongly suggest we not treat this like a puzzle to be outsmarted." Elena sat back, lips thinning. My father's eyes shifted to me, as if only now, recognizing I might not be bluffing. "How do you plan to fund this?" he asked. "Do you know the tax burden on a property like this? The roof, the boiler, the access road. You'll need lines of credit. You'll need guarantees. We have relationships. You do not. Banks are not charities. I had spent weeks after my grandmother passed organizing a pile of documents that smelled faintly of peppermint. And I knew exactly how much oil the ancient boiler drank. The last date. The septic was pumped. The invoice from the roofer. The property tax bill, with the little note she'd written to herself about the due date. I also knew something my father didn't. My grandmother had been careful, and surprisingly modern when it came to paperwork. There's a maintenance account, I said, letting the words land without flourish, and a small endowment. She set them up 3 years ago. It's not endless, but it takes the edge off. I met with the credit union. I have a path. Saying it aloud made my throat go tight again. Pride braided with terror. It felt strange to speak like someone with a plan in front of a man who had only ever told me. My plans were daydreams in better shoes. My mother blinked. She did what Mr. Hayes nodded. A dedicated account for repairs and capital expenses. Funded from rental income, and a small annuity. She purchased when she sold the parcel 20 years ago. No one has signatory authority again. She prepared. The line between my father's brows deepened. It pivoted. He always did. Elena, he said without looking at her. The way a foreman talks to the crew. Cal Holden Realty. Tell them to send over the management contract template. We'll draft something. Advisory. If the boy refuses, we file an injunction to prevent waste. We claim he's jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar asset. We can get a temporary order in 48 hours. Martin. Mr. Hayes said. Finally, letting the weariness show. If you file anything. Attachment C triggers the cabin's move to the trust, the moment your action hits the clerk's desk. You will be suing to shrink the estate you claim to protect. My father looked at him the way a frustrated chess player looks at a board that refuses to produce a weak square. Then we'll negotiate. We'll present terms he cannot refuse. I watched the window. A pair of jays bounced between the fir branches like two notes on opposite ends of a piano. For a second, the ordinary world pierced the room with the simple fact of itself. I thought of guests who would check in next month with backpacks and warm socks. The couple who returned every anniversary and took the same photo in front of the carved bear by the front steps. The school group that came once a year to learn to snowshoe and left us a card with clumsy signatures, shaped like little mountains. The lodge was not a spreadsheet. It was a place where lives brushed against each other and picked up a little of the other snow. The door clicked. We all turned in the hallway. Two soft voices exchanged a few rapid words. And then Mr. Hayes' secretary stepped in with an apologetic tilt of her head. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said. I scanning the tension like a weather report. But there's a gentleman here insisting he needs to speak to whoever is responsible for the lodge. He says it cannot wait. My father stood. Seeing an opening. Send him in, he said. Before Mr. Hayes could answer. We represent the family. The secretary hesitated and then looked at me. Her eyes asked questions. I nodded once. It's fine, I said. If it's about the lodge, I should hear it. A man stepped in who didn't look like a developer or a banker. He looked like a local who knows the mountains. Moods. Wind. Burnt cheeks. Clean jacket with a park emblem stitched at the chest. An envelope tucked under his arm. He took in the conference room. My parents' posture. Mr. Hayes. Neat stack of papers. My hands flat on the table. Then rested his gaze on me as if testing a door he hoped would open. You know what he said, yes. I'm Dan from Forest Service. He said. We've been in touch with Mrs. Novak in the past. I tried to call yesterday. But he stopped. Glanced toward the folder with my grandmother's name. And recalibrated. We flagged something on last week's trail inspection down by the south parcel. You got a moment, he lifted the envelope. On the corner was a map. My father exhaled in irritation. We're in the middle of legal proceedings, he said. Whatever it is. It can wait. Dan shook his head. It can't, he said simply. There's a survey marker that moved and a path cut. That shouldn't be. It looks like someone started putting stakes in along the creek. Private stakes. Not ours. He slid a photo from the envelope. Bright orange flags fluttering in front of a line of alders. If those are where I think they are. Someone's planning to run a road right through the lower meadow. Elena leaned forward. This bite herself. A road. Who not sure yet? Dan said. We found tire tracks that don't match. Usual maintenance. And this? He placed another item on the table. A laminated badge, half hidden in dirt. The logo on it made my father's face go, still holding development. I didn't know the name. But my father did. I could read it in the way his jaw worked. Once. Twice. As if chewing a thought he didn't want to swallow. The badge had a first name and an initial. The same developer my grandmother had named on the video. The same one whose letters she had refused. Mr. Hayes swore under his breath in a very careful way that added no heat to the room. If they've started encroaching, he said, we can get an emergency order. But we need proof. Photos. Witnesses, Dan nodded. I've got some. Not enough for a judge who likes everything in triplicate. He tipped the envelope toward me. But I figured the owner should know before the stakes become gravel. My mother spoke up for the first time in minutes. Voice tight. We had nothing to do with that. It came out fast. Unasked. A defense against a charge no one had made explicitly yet. It hung in the air like a foghorn and clear whether Elena found her footing again. Dan. You said you worked with our grandmother in the past. She said, switching to friendly neighbor mode. You know. We all want what's best. Dan's. I slid past her to me. What I know? He said evenly. Is that Mrs.? Novak called twice last year about a different neighbor who tried to cut a new path. She was clear about boundaries. She walked them herself. He nodded at me. You want to walk them now? My father laughed once. A small, dry sound. Now? He said in the middle of this. Dan didn't look at him. The flags will be gone by tomorrow if the person who set them knows they've been seen. He felt a current move under my ribs. The kind of hard clarity that arrives not with triumph, but with the sense that you were standing exactly where your next step must be. This was not about a contract. I could negotiate around a table. This was about the land itself. The creek that threaded the meadow. The little footbridge I'd mended with my grandmother in spring. I stood without realizing I had. We'll go. I said. We, my mother echoed. As if the word were a challenge. I looked at Dan. I'll go. I corrected Mr. Hayes. If there's a way to file something today, file it. If there's a form handed to me when I get back. Elena. I hesitate that. I won't stop you from hiring a lawyer. But the first thing I'm doing as the person who now holds the keys is walking those boundary lines. Elena opened her mouth to argue. My father beat her to it. You're not leaving this room with this unsettled. He said. Hand flat on the table. As if he could pin the moment like a paper. You think you can run out to the woods and play surveyor, and that makes you an owner. Sit down. Something in his voice. The old leash hidden in it tugged out a version of me that always sat. But then I saw my grandmother on the screen again. Bones thinner. But eyes steady. Telling me that some decisions must be made with your feet. Not just your head. I reached for the envelope. Dance slid it toward me. The paper rasped on the wood like a quiet. Yes. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. Before you go. He said. One more thing. He pulled a small, heavy object from a drawer and set it down in front of me. It was a brass key on a file with an etched number I knew by heart. 3. The safe deposit box at Maple Street Credit Union. My grandmother and I had visited that vault once years ago. When she wanted to show me where old letters slept. She asked me to give you this at the reading. He said I was going to hand it over after. But given the developments, I think now is wiser. He hesitated. She said there are documents in there you wouldn't know what to do with if anyone tried to bend a mountain into a straight line. The room seemed to tilt a degree. Like a ship turning. My father stared at the key. As if it were a piece of metal that could ruin a generation. My mother looked trapped between two versions of herself. One who wanted to stop this. And one who wanted to go home and sit in the quiet for the first time in years. Elena's eyes flickered. Not greed. Exactly. But calculation. Trying to compute what new information might do to the game board. I slipped the key into my pocket. It had a reassuring weight. Not heavy. Like a chain. But heavy like a tool. I looked at my parents one by one. I'm walking the boundary. I said again. Quiero. You can come if you want. But I'm not asking permission. Dan nodded toward the door with a half grin. That wasn't unkind. Bring boots. He said. It's muddy down by the creek. My father pushed his chair back so suddenly it scraped the floor. Elena. He said. Voice clipped. Call Holden. Tell them to stand by. Then ring Patterson at the firm. If he's in court. Him pulled out. We're moving. He turned to Mr. Hayes with a look that was almost pity. Almost fury. You may think you've locked this up with clauses and videos. But you underestimate how much muscle the world gives people who refuse to be sidelined. Mr. Hayes didn't flinch. I don't underestimate anything, he said. I only read what is. I took a breath that tasted like bark and paper in the middle of the key. Dan held the door. The hallway smelled faintly of toner and rain behind me. I heard my mother stand as if a string had pulled her up. Noah, she said. And the way she said my name made me stop with one hand on the doorframe. You're making a mistake. I turned enough to meet her eyes for a heartbeat. We were two people in a story. Neither of us had written. Only inherited. Maybe. I said. But it will be mine. We stepped into the hall, and the closing door cut the conference room in half like a photograph. Shuddering. Dan moved fast. Purposeful. The kind of fast that comes from knowing the difference between urgent and loud. Outside. The mountaineer shook the tightness out of my lungs. We headed for his truck. He handed me the envelope and I tucked it under my arm. The corner of the map. Poking my skin through the jacket, as if insisting on being felt halfway down the steps. My phone buzzed a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Dan paused. Reading my hesitation. Like trail sign could be important. He said. I answered hello. A calm, unfamiliar voice. Is this Noah Novak? Yes. This is Holden Development. The voice said. Polite in that way that filed off fingerprints. We understand there's been a change in circumstances. We'd like to make you an offer directly for the meadow and creek rights. Expedited. Generous and confidential. If you accept within 24 hours, we can wire a substantial deposit today. I stopped on the second to last step. Wind moved through the firs with a sound like a match being struck. I don't sell what isn't for sale. I said. The voice smiled without moving a face. Everything has a price. Noah. Even principles. Even nostalgia. Especially when those around you are persuasive. My father's voice in the conference room. Elena's pen poised to turn air into contracts. The brass key warm in my pocket. Dan watching my face with patient attention. My grandmother's recording. Steady and unashamed. Naming what people had tried to do in the kind of daylight that makes shadows honest. What exactly, I asked. And my voice surprised me by how steady it was. Do you think you're buying? There was a soft chuckle. Time. Silence. Easement. You can keep your little lodge cosplay. We just need a road. A road through the meadow. Past the bridge. I'd patch with my grandmother while she told me that snowmelt sings a different note every year. I stared at the valley where the creek ran like a thread of glass. No one had the right to smudge. Dan touched the envelope. We should go. He said. I lifted the phone again. I'll give you my answer. I said. But not on a call. 24 hours. The voice repeated. After that, we take a different route. The line went dead. I slid the phone into my pocket. We climbed into the truck. The door. Thunk. A kind of answer to the world's suggestion that everything bends with enough pressure. Dan started the engine. The wipers began a slow rhythm across the windshield as a light rain started to patter. Each drop a small percussion on the hood. We turned down the drive toward the south parcel. The trees closing in like an audience leaning forward. The map between us on the bench seat. That brass key heavy against my thigh. And somewhere behind us. A conference room where my family was deciding whether to become my opponents or my witnesses. As the truck's tires found the gravel, Dan glanced over. You know, he said. Tone conversational. Like he was asking about weather. If those stakes are where I think they are, they'd have to have permission from the adjacent owner to the old Hansen parcel. But Hansen sold last year to a shell company out of state. No listed address. I gripped the envelope a little tighter. Do you know the company name? He nodded. Ridgepoint Acquisitions. I didn't recognize it. But the way, Dan added, almost as an afterthought. We traced the contact number for Ridgepoint once it forwarded to a landline in town. Made my chest fold inward. Whose? I asked. Dan shot me a brief, apologetic look. The caller ID pinged something like Patterson and Lowe. Your father mentioned to Patterson. Didn't he? The truck rolled on the range. Sharp and thin as needles. Startling in its suddenness. We took the turn where the gravel gives up and becomes dirt. The meadow opening to our right. Like a hell breath in the distance. Bright as a wrong note. In a familiar song. A line of orange flags fluttered in a wind that had started to rise. And just as I slid my hand into my pocket to feel the key again, a second phone began to buzz. Not mine this time. But Dan's. Lighting up his dash with a caller ID. I couldn't see. He frowned. Glanced at it. And then handed me the device without taking his eyes off the rutted road. You should answer. He said. It's Mr. Hayes. I brought the phone to my ear. The meadow opening. The flags snapping. The creek glinting like a thin blade. And Mr. Hayes' voice came through over a hiss of office air. No. Wait. He said. I just opened the sealed letter that came with your grandmother's video. There's something you need to know before you set foot on that meadow. It changes everything about who can and can't put a road there. He paused. The kind of pause that rearranges furniture inside a life. Your grandmother recorded a deed transfer to you and to someone else. Co-ownership of the south parcel, named by first and middle. Only to avoid attention. She wrote that the second owner would know when the time came. Mr. Hayes' voice in Dan's truck sounded like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Noah. He said. Your grandmother transferred the south parcel to you and one other person. She didn't want the name read unless it was necessary. But with those flags out there, it's necessary. The co-owner is Daniel Hayes. Me, for a moment. I thought I'd misheard. My grandmother had made her lawyer a co-owner of part of the land. But then the pieces began to fall together like stones. Finally finding their places in a wall. He'd been more than her lawyer. He'd been her friend for 40 years. He and his wife had shared dinners at the lodge. Helped her through winters. And, as I now realized, promised her one thing: my family never could protection by tying him to the land legally. She had ensured someone with both power and loyalty would stand guard if anyone tried to chip away at her wishes. Dan turned the wheel, guiding the truck closer to the meadow where the orange flags fluttered. That, he said, slowly changes the game. It did. Because now it wasn't just me, the estranged grandson, with limited experience holding the line against developers in my parents' schemes. It was me and a seasoned lawyer who had spent decades navigating contracts and courts who had his own skin in the fight. The lodge wasn't standing alone anymore. When we reached the meadow, the rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with wet grass and pine. The flags cut across the earth like wounds. Dan took photos while I crouched near the creek, running my hand across the damp soil, where tire tracks curved too close to the water. The creek whispered, as it always had. Unbothered but watchful. I thought of my grandmother's words. Sometimes love is proven by who shows up with firewood when the stove goes out. I had shown up. She had made sure I wasn't the only one. That evening, back in town, we met at Mr. Hayes' office. He laid out the co-ownership deed. Stamped and sealed. This is airtight. He told me. With me, named Holden. Can't bully you with threats of inexperience. And if your parents want to file something, they'll have to do it against me. 2. I've spent my career preparing for people who think pressure is a substitute for principle. It was the first time in my life an adult had looked at me not as someone to scold or rescue, but as a partner. The next morning, we filed an emergency injunction against Holden's encroachment, attaching the photos and Dan's sworn statement. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, a judge had ordered Holden to cease all activity near the creek until further notice. The orange flags were pulled out. Their absence as loud as their presence had been. My parents, furious, tried to push through back channels. Elena drafted proposals for advisory committees, waving them in front of me with that same polished smile. My father hinted at loans. Just until you find your footing. My mother tried guilt sitting across from me at the lodge's kitchen table saying, "Your grandmother would hate seeing us like this." But here's what she didn't understand. My grandmother had already seen us like this. That's why she had written those clauses. That's why she'd given me the key and given Hayes the deed. Love wasn't blind. It was watchful. The months that followed weren't easy. Running the lodge meant dawn spent fixing heaters. Afternoons answering. Booking emails. Nights making sure guests had firewood stacked high enough. But it also meant laughter in the dining hall. The smell of pancakes on winter mornings. Hikers returning with stories of trails that left them breathless. Every time I felt doubt creep in, I'd walk the creek line where the flags had once stood. And remind myself this place is still. Holden eventually pulled out. They couldn't fight the injunction. Not with Hayes holding co-ownership, and my grandmother's affidavit making their prior dealings look like vultures circling too soon. The shell company that bought the Hanson parcel dissolved within 6 months. The road project vanished like smoke in the wind. As for my parents, they stopped calling after a while. At first I thought the silence would ache. But instead, it made room for new sounds. The laughter of guests. The crunch of snow under boots. The steady hum of a place alive and unbroken. Elena sent one last email. Terse and professional. Saying she wished me the best. But hoped I'd reconsider her partnership in the future. I didn't reply. So messages deserved to sit unread. One spring morning, as the meadow bloomed with wildflowers, I found myself sitting on the porch steps where my grandmother and I used to rest after chores. I pulled the brass key from my pocket inside the safe deposit box. I had found letters she'd written just for me, advice, encouragement, and one final reminder. No mountains outlast those who only see them as stone. But they remember those who walk their paths with care. I smiled then, a real one. Not forced or defensive, because she was right. The lodge wasn't just worth $1.9 million. It was worth every moment of struggle it had taken to protect it. It was worth my name. My effort. My future. And it was worth hers. That's how it ended. Not with a sale. Not with a fight lost. But with a family's greed turned back by foresight and trust. My parents had walked into that while reading, thinking they'd already won. But my grandmother had seen the truth long before they arrived. She had chosen love over image. Legacy over greed. And now, every time guests check in, every time I hear boots on the porch at night or laughter echoing through the halls, I know exactly what she meant when she asked if I knew my worth. I know now. And it's measured. Not in their approval. Not in dollar signs. But in every heartbeat. This lodge still holds untouched. Unbroken. And finally truly mine.